Hello, welcome everyone. I am Dr. Malia Jones. I'm a social infectious disease epidemiologist and also the editor-in-chief here at Dear Pandemic. And today is Saturday, March 13th, 2021. It is the 1-year anniversary of Dear Pandemic's launch on Facebook. And also the 1-year anniversary of the day that many of us had our lives turned upside down by the COVID-19 pandemic. I'm really excited today because I'm joined by a big crew of my collaborators here at Dear Pandemic, including a few people who don't usually make it to the camera side of the live sessions. So I want to welcome a bunch of my nerdy girls, and I'll just briefly introduce each of us. I have joining me Dr. Alison Buttenheim, who is my co-founder. Dr. Ashley Ritter, whose idea it was to put all this on Facebook. So we have you to blame, Ashley, I think, fundamentally. Also, Sandra Albrecht. Dr. Albrecht is the editor-in-chief at our Spanish language partner page, Querida Pandemia. Lindsey Leininger and Jennifer Dowd, who are our co-CEOs right now, Lauren Hale and Dr. Amanda Simanek, who are some of our original contributors, and Shoshana Abronowitz, who is a nurse practitioner and our manager of our Insta page. Did I get everybody? I think I did. Oh, not Gretchen. I was saving Gretchen for last. Gretchen is our amazing CEO and COO and the person who really makes it all work at Dear Pandemic. She's normally the one who's dropping the links and monitoring comments on our live sessions. And she also does a ton of the other operations work in the background. So we're really grateful that she's able to join us on camera this morning and also for everything else she does for us at Dear Pandemic. And I am also joined, of course, today by our ASL interpreter, whose name is Jeannie, and she is provided to us as well as our CART services by Bridges for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing, who are providing the live closed captioning and ASL interpretation. I know there are a lot of people on the screen today, and so Jeannie is probably very small on a mobile device. So if you are using the ASL interpretation, it's probably going to work better if you review this video after the fact. It'll be on our Facebook page as well as our website, and do that on a bigger screen. We tried to figure out how to make Jeannie bigger, but we couldn't quite do it. So thanks everyone for joining me today. It's been a big week filled with emotion for me. Remembering all the terrible uncertainty and the call to action that I felt as the pandemic began to unfold last year has been, frankly, rough going this week. I just could never have predicted where we would be a year in and the amazing team effort that this has become. So thank you all for being here today and also for having been here for this whole last year. I personally really appreciate it. So we're not going to take questions from readers today. If you do have a pandemic question, go to our website and put it in our question box. We will read it for next week. And instead, we're going to take some time to just reflect a bit on what the last year has looked like. And I have a few reflection questions that I want to ask of my wonderful collaborators here. So the first one is, looking back, if you could send your 1-year younger self a telegram, what would you tell you? Lauren, what do you think?
Sure. I gave this some thought, and what I really wish I knew back in March of last year was it's okay to go outside and take walks and be socially distant with other people. And I think the science might have been there at that time, but I live in New York with my family, and the numbers were spiking so high and there was so much uncertainty. And it really felt like it wasn't safe to go down to the park. I'm not talking about going on playgrounds with other kids, but just go take a walk. And I wish I knew that then, because now that I am doing that, I know the benefits for my own mental health, my physical health, my social experience. So I really wish I started doing that earlier. And maybe the science wasn't there at the time or the messaging wasn't there, but I wish I got that telegram. So that's what I wish I knew.
Yeah, I think that my message would have been really similar, just in a very practical sense, just knowing that it was relatively safe to be outdoors would have made last summer, I think, a lot easier to take, and spring too. Sandra, you're also in New York. What are your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I mean, I think it kind of dovetails with what Lauren just said, but for me, it's also about just pacing myself. I think that's the key words of advice I'd have. Um, in the beginning of the pandemic back in March, I'm here in New York City in particular. I have to admit that I was maybe a bit naive because I just didn't think that this would last very long. Even as an epidemiologist, my career and most of our careers span other outbreaks like the SARS outbreak and H1N1 flu outbreak, which is a pretty bad outbreak, but neither of those, reached the heights that COVID-19 did. And so I think, based my naive perspective, but also my more optimistic perspective, had me thinking that this was not something that was going to last very long. I kept thinking, we have a pandemic playbook, so we will just execute it and then we will just go home and, we'll go back to our regularly scheduled programming. So I just didn't think it was going to last very long. So I think, now in hindsight, I would just tell myself, it's going to be, we're going to be in here for the long haul, whatever it is you're doing, both in terms of work and in life. I'm one of those that have young children at home doing remote schooling while trying to work full time. I think I would just dial back the intensity of my work, but also in life in general, because we're going to be doing this for a very long time. So whatever it is you're doing, just make sure your approach is one that can be sustained for a really long time, because it's going to be really important for both physical and mental health. So pace yourself is really the key piece of advice I'd give myself and others too, probably.
Such interesting reflections on the other pandemics that we've experienced in our lifetimes. Because I also thought, I thought it was going to be maybe 6 or 8 weeks. People were saying 2 weeks. I knew it was going to be longer than 2 weeks, but and it didn't occur to me until you just said that my past experience was these a few weeks, and then the pandemic playbook would execute itself and magically solve all of our problems.
We've been looking back this week at some of the early email exchanges and messaging exchanges when we were recruiting you all to be co-nerdy girls with us. And the asks were like, hey, for a couple of weeks, would you like to answer some questions on Facebook? And we just, belly laugh now looking at that. And none of us knew what we were getting into, even with this project, let alone the rest of our lives.
Well, I'm glad to know I wasn't the only one that thought this was going to be something short term. I know for a while I was like, was I the only fool? Especially as an epidemiologist who really knew what was happening, I still really didn't think it was going to last very long. And again, that was based on, past experience with other outbreaks. It just didn't reach the heights. The other outbreaks didn't reach the heights that this one did. And so I just did not think we were going to be in this for this amount of time.
All right, Amanda, what do you think? If you could send your 1 year younger self a telegram, what would that message be?
I have very similar, thoughts to Sandra, that a year ago there was so much uncertainty. I mean, many of us were getting pinged to try to predict just what the next month was going to look like. And it, I think I would like to tell myself a year from today, we're going to have several vaccines that are like highly effective, and there is going to be a way out of this, and that it is going to take longer than we thought. Not, actually quicker to get vaccines, but, it, like you guys said, it wasn't clear how long it was going to last. It wasn't clear how widespread it was. Like, there was just so much uncertainty at the beginning. And I think, kind of telling myself, you need to pace yourself because this is going to take a while. There's going to be ups and downs. But that if I could know that a year from now, there would be such light at the end of the tunnel, I think that would have helped, me deal with that, with the uncertainty. So I've said to other people, for those that have gone through childbirth, you know, if someone could just tell you it's going to be 16 hours, like it's going to, however long it's going to be, you could endure, you could, you know, or you might, that would help me endure. It's the uncertainty, like, okay, can I do this for another 10 minutes? Can I do this for another month? You know, with the pandemic. So that's my personality though, you know, so I think if I could just sort of, yeah, tell myself a year ago, look, a year from now, things are going to be way different. You know, that might have helped.
And with a vaccine on the horizon for so many people, and at least in high income countries. I was just thinking about the, you know, one of the challenges then was that unknown. I think, you know, when everybody was talking about 2 weeks, I was like kind of eye rolling, no way, this will take just 2 weeks. I thought it would be a couple of months, you know, through the summer perhaps, but certainly not a whole year. And I think if I had come out, you know, can you imagine if we had come out with a message last March that said, this is going to take a year? We probably would have been laughed off of social media.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that would have been welcoming to our readership, you know. I think, and we would have felt overwhelmed with that as well and not been able to sort of stick with this or even set out to start this project.
Yeah, it really has been built kind of one day at a time, putting one foot in front of the other all this time.
Or what the
I mean,
different...
looking back, it's probably best we didn't know.
The end date would have been
right?
helpful though, right? To know that like, okay, the vaccines are going to be available to healthcare workers by December. That would have been, that would have really helped me scale.
Yeah, not knowing what the shape of the, you know, at least in the US with our sort of 3 big peaks, hopefully the last one a month ago. You know, if you just look at the epidemic curves up through September, you see these 2 big peaks, and then those shrink, right, when we see the January one, and just not knowing what that roller coaster was going to look like. It's distressing.
Yes. Okay, well, let's move on to this next question. It's related, but maybe a little more personal. And this one is, what have you learned about yourself this year? And Gretchen, I want to throw this one to you.
Well, I've learned a lot as a result of actually my involvement with Dear Pandemic. And the main thing is I've learned that I have more capacity than I thought to learn new things and to and how much fun it is still to learn. Even when I'm in over my head, which I am a lot of the time with this group, I just love the, you know, searching for information. I mean, I've learned, as I knew as a technology teacher, that you can learn how to do most anything by Googling or YouTube. I mean, that really is, I've learned a lot. Just that's my go-to. But, you know, I really thought I'd spend my retirement knitting and gardening and reading and, you know, doing some volunteer work with a rescue group. I mean, I had my retirement in my head, and then
we're your rescue group.
What? Yeah, you're my rescue group. That's right. You're my rescue group. And humans are animals, by the way. I have learned that from Dear Pandemic as well. So so anyway, my life is constantly, now you need me to do what? Oh, okay. I'll figure it out. No problem. You know, so I love that. It's just constantly changing. And the other thing I've learned is I'm more flexible than I thought. My husband always said that for me, the F word was flexible. Because I was not. And I don't know why, but, you know, so my grocery order is not quite right. Oh, I'll change the recipe a little bit. So, you know, I couldn't go to Costa Rica. Big deal. I'll go next year. And I think that really what's made me flexible is to realize how blessed I have been through this whole thing in so many ways, and that to ever complain or feel bad about some little thing in my life that didn't go right, it's just doesn't feel right. So, you know, feeling that blessing and gratitude has really helped me let go of some things that I probably would have been upset about before. So
What about you, Malia?
Yeah. So yeah, I feel like I've learned a lot of things about myself this year, but the one that really stands out to me is that I finally understand what self-care means, that term. Like people throw that term around, oh, let's practice self-care. And I was always like, I literally don't know what that is. I don't know what you're talking about. And I was always really resistant to the idea of a work-life balance because to me, it's not really a balancing act. It's more like a circus performance or a juggling act or something. And so I feel like especially telling women to strive for something that looks like balance is sort of unfair because it's not really achievable. It's never in balance. It's always a juggling performance of some sort. And this year, I think I finally learned what self-care is for me, which has been, a really valuable lesson. I know what it looks like. And for me, it's really a lot about being alone. It's been very challenging to not ever be alone for the last year because I'm an introverted person and I value my alone time. And so having the kids home all the time for homeschooling and having my husband work from home and me working from home, it's just, I love them and I love spending time with them. And I also really value alone time. So that has been one of my big takeaways is that, for me, self-care means time to reflect and be by myself. I saw a lot of heads nodding when I said alone time.
I remember,
everyone here who has young children probably feels that.
What I remember is the podcast with Lauren Froyo. She talked about balance as a process and sort of like checking in on your balance as opposed to a state that you achieve. And that really hit home for me. It's just, am I thinking about the balance as opposed to achieving it?
Right. Yeah. She talks about it as, when we balance, even if we're walking, the act of balancing is not a static condition. It's really, you're always making little adjustments to try and maintain your balance. And so it's stasis, but it's very active. Yeah, that resonates for me a lot too. I'll put a link to her podcast in the comments when we're done here so that folks can go check it out.
And what Gretchen said about flexibility just made me think how amazed I really have been at how society has adapted and humans have adapted to all of this in ways that we just never imagined. I mean, and even our kids who, have gone through a lot, just the way that they've rolled with virtual school and Zoom play dates and all of that. And the way working has changed probably forever in a lot of ways. I think early on, I was just amazed at the capacity of humans to adapt to new realities. And a lot has gone wrong, but I think I've been really, impressed with, and it makes me understand how humans have gotten through crises throughout history, that you can see how people come together and adapt. And it's been really amazing to watch.
It is incredible how sometimes, there's some examples of things I think that we've adjusted to make things work that are maybe things that we had talked about and thought about for years and years before. And it's like, maybe we can do it, but maybe we can't. I'm thinking my own life as a clinician, like using telehealth widely.
I was hoping you were going to bring up telehealth.
Can we do it? Like, will it work? And then it was like, it has to work. So we're doing it. And like, it's working. And so, there's been opportunities, I think, for this like rapid change. And oftentimes the changes are not things that are like completely out of nowhere, but they're things that have been percolating. And we were, I think, fearful and we're able to choose not to do them. And then once we were no longer able to choose, we just had to do it. And some of them have really worked.
I hope that's true for, conferences and academic presentations and seminars. Like, you don't have to fly to California to give a talk in California anymore. We've just leapfrogged with both the technology and also just the social acceptance and figuring out how to make it work and having it work just fine.
There's climate implications too, if we're thinking
Huge.
about how much traveling we thought we had to do and there was really no way to get around it. Yeah.
And participation. I think a lot about how easy it is for to open up things like academic conferences to the world. And a lot of these conferences that I attend are in the United States, and it's very hard to get international travelers to them. And so it's great to have more international participation in those scientific communities. Okay, let's go to the next question. So this one is, I'm going to go to Lindsey first on this one. What fundamental questions do you think have been raised this year about the big picture, science or society or being human?
So this is a light one, People Magazine kind of fodder, right? Yeah, so I'm going to take this actually from a micro lens of our learning community and then try to generalize what we've been living through to broader society. So look, Dear Pandemic is not about us, the nerdy girls. It is about you. It is about our community. It is about our readers. And I think the thing that I am most proud of is stewarding a learning community. We learn from our readers. You know, this is like a two-way street. We learn from each other. And when I think about a learning community, whether it be Dear Pandemic or whether it be nationally, the biggest threat in my mind is toxic partisanship. We have seen toxic partisanship exact a lot of nastiness, sadly, in our own community. If you look at this from the microcosm of the comment section, whoa, all the way to our society in terms of people's opinions on masks being driven by what their politics are, which is nuts. So I think the only thing that can supersede partisanship is the power of personal connection. And that's what we see here at Dear Pandemic, right? Like, we care about you as people, you care about us as people. So with an open mind and an open heart, we can bridge this political chasm. But absent that, we're in a bad way. And I think that I have looked at partisanship and it has been, I don't like politics anymore. I'm a public policy PhD. I used to live for Meet the Press every Sunday, and now I don't like it. So I just think the role of partisanship in our public's health has frankly kind of depressed me.
Way to bring it down, Linz.
I was just going to say, well, on that happy note, let's go to Ashley.
And I'm the optimist.
I know. So let's go to Ashley on this one. What about you? What fundamental questions do you think have been raised this year about science or society?
Well, I would say I'm also an optimist, but have had my eyes wide open through what has happened. And so I will try to give the positive, but realistic spin. And it's that people are connected by strings. And we realized very, very quick that you can't function in society without many different industries. And so our grocery store workers became incredibly important. Our public transportation drivers, our nursing home workforce, all became very visible. And we saw that when college students go back, we see community transmission that ends up in a nursing home. And so I hope that this window into a crisis showed us just how connected everybody is, and that we all bring our skills to the table to make the solutions better moving forward. We cannot forget how connected we all are. And there's so much power in the skill sets that everyone brings to the table. And I think the downside is that we're living in a house of cards. And at any moment, this infrastructure that we rely on for convenience, for international trade, for the daily functions of life, they're very fragile, and there's a significant level of inequity in many of those systems. And we do have the power to move forward and strengthen those systems that will benefit everybody that lives in that house of cards. And so it has opened my eyes very much to how we're connected. And I hope that we capitalize on the skills that everyone brings, not just those with money and power, to strengthen that house of cards.
I love that answer, Ashley. Thank you for saying that. I had my thoughts about this kind of went directly to like science communication and how people, just in the broader community understand how science works. And we were talking about this right before we started, but, science is not a set fixed of facts, which I think is kind of how a lot of people sometimes view it. It's a process. And I think about this reflecting back on the beginning when we were like, no, maybe we don't need to wear masks. Should we wear masks? Oh yeah, everyone has to wear masks. And I think I've spoken to a lot of friends and acquaintances who think about that time, and that it's kind of like the root of their mistrust in kind of all of the scientific guidance. Like, how does it change like that? What does that mean? And I think it's just, maybe as scientists, we don't always do a great job of communicating what we do every day, and that we are learning and discovering constantly, and our guidance is improving as our understanding changes. And I think this often happens behind the scenes. Like, as a clinician, I think about how we learn all the time that like maybe a treatment that we thought was the best isn't the best, or there's a new one that's better. And that can mean that like you can be treated with one medicine for an illness, and then 2 years later have the same illness, and it's like, actually we have a better medicine for that. And it's not that we were lying to you before, it's that we really just didn't know. And I think this has kind of just been an opportunity for everyone to see this happen out there, not behind the scenes, just in front of everybody and quickly, because this has moved so quickly. So I can see how that has been the root, I think, of a lot of people's mistrust. And I think it's on us as scientists to really talk about not just what the current science is, but how we get there and how our process develops and what we do every day, because I think that's what's often just missing when people learn about, what our guidance or recommendations are.
There's been some silver lining
So
there too.
I wanted to tie what Lindsey said and what Shoshi just said, because a lot of this uncertainty has been used by partisanship and amplified as a reason not to trust science. So I feel like what Lindsey just said and what Shoshi just said are really completely tied together.
I wanted to kind of thread that through Ashley's comment as well, in that, we get irritated sometimes that there's all these armchair epidemiologists and armchair virologists now. But on the other hand, like millions of people tune into FDA meetings now. I imagine parents now going to their pediatric appointments with their kids to get their kids vaccines and like asking the physician, what kind of vaccine is the MMR vaccine? Is that like a viral vector?
Tell me about its efficaciousness.
Yes, exactly. I'd like to see the phase 3 trial data, please. Like there has been this, science has been more visible. And I do think people, have learned a lot. I sort of fantasize that all these middle schoolers now want to be epidemiologists when they grow up. There is, we are battling some scientific illiteracy for sure, but I think there's also been just this, immersion course for all of us in these new fields.
Yeah, if I can speak to that. So I have been a regulatory science geek for a very long time, and in fact have worked in regulatory science, and now that's cool, right? So this whole idea of nerdy chic, woo! It's our brand.
And people watching FDA meetings, my God. All right, let's move on to our last question. And it's a big question. So I'm going to bring out the big guns here, and I'm going to direct this at Jen first. She's really good at these big questions. What's the biggest outstanding question mark at this point in your mind?
Yeah, this was a big question. I guess first, I just wanted to reflect on, despite everything that seemingly went wrong during the pandemic, I also am an optimist and still kind of in complete awe at how science and pharmaceutical companies, who often get a bad rap until we need them very urgently. I'm just in awe of how mobilizing all of that knowledge and resources and people is really getting us out of this at record speed, even though it hasn't seemed that fast compared to what we thought a year ago. So for me, the $1 million question going forward is, how will we react if this happens again, and what lessons have we learned? So we mentioned a pandemic playbook, and I really feel that we urgently have to reflect on what's happened and make sure that we learn the lessons that we owe the next generation from what we've been through. Will we be scrambling again? Will it be deja vu, or will we have learned some things as scientists and as a society? And thinking back on the masks, for example, I think we were all so surprised that we didn't actually have good pre-existing studies on this. Even at different levels in the lab, in communities, there was so little to go on. And we can plan now for the future. What studies do we wish that we had? the vaccine process, as amazing as it was, we've all seen in the last couple months how there were many questions we wish had been built in. The whole 1 dose versus delayed 2nd dose, could have very easily been baked into some of the trials. If we had surveyed household members about their infection status, we could have learned a lot about transmission. So all these things that we didn't, think about early on, we now know. And I think, our generation just really owes it to the kids now who made all these sacrifices and couldn't make any of these decisions. The future generations, we have to write that next playbook and learn as much as we can. And as some people have mentioned, I think one of the true silver linings has been us all getting out of our narrow disciplines, and we've had to talk to each other. So we've got, nurses, epidemiologists, immunologists, social scientists here talking on a daily basis. And if we can leverage that to figure out the lessons learned and what we need to do going forward, I think that would be amazing. And if we fail to learn lessons from this, I think that would just be the inexcusable thing that I can't live with. So I think that's going to be one of the goals I hope that all of us carry forward.
And on a more microcosm piece of Jennifer's incredibly powerful statement there, we are committed to helping write the playbook for Nerdy Girls of the Future. It is a personal commitment of mine, and I know that other team members feel that way too.
Yeah, I can't wait to see what the future brings for those nerdy girls on that front. Alison, what do you think? What are our biggest outstanding question marks at this point?
I feel a little bit of pressure. We were just fortunate enough to have an amazing profile of Dear Pandemic and the Nerdy Girls in National Geographic. And one of our followers said that this Saturday morning time with us is like, the best TV. It was like Gilmore Girls and The Crown and Friends and like all wrapped up in one. So I'm feeling a lot of pressure to like deliver here for, I think her name was Susan. So the one for me right now has to do with 2 phrases that I'm hearing a lot: post-COVID and after the pandemic. And I don't think any of us knows what that means or how we'll know when we're there or what it will look like. And I think we're hearing from the virologists that, likely there isn't really like an afterwards. There's just a different version or a different phase, or it becomes endemic and we get shots every year or something. And we've heard all along, Fauci has said it, everyone said it, that there's no switch that's going to flip and tell us that we're done. But as there's this growing optimism that maybe the summer looks kind of back to normal and maybe the fall looks totally back to normal, I think we need to do some work around answering that question, like what do we mean by afterwards or post this disease, so that we can, be on the same policy page, be on the same, epidemiology page about what that is.
Alison, what you just said really struck a chord with me around this idea of the problem of black and white thinking. And this is sort of in the same vein of this idea of there is an after, there's an end point. One of the things that I have really taken away from this is that we as humans have a really hard time with thinking about continuums. We just, especially when there's uncertainty, we just want a yes or no answer. And, this idea of after the pandemic is related, because there's not going to be like a day when it ends, right? That it's going to sort of slowly and annoyingly transition into something else.
I think this has been like a war or a battle. And so we imagine it's going to be like, VE Day or VJ Day, where we all run out into the street and like smooch with soldiers who are coming home or something.
And I think a related sort of what's next is science communication is prime time. We have learned how important it is for good scientific information to get into the public. And that wasn't sexy before. That was not something that was valued in academics. That was not really something that the public was looking for. And there's this great opportunity to do that in a capacity with sort of a demand that wasn't there before. And I'm excited for what that might look like.
And Malia, I want to speak to your thing about how hard it is not to look in black and white, because I go through the question box every week, and I know that that's really hard for some of our readers. You know, they want answers from us. That's what,
Me too.
that's
It is
what
hard.
that's what we do. They want us to answer yes or no, but it wouldn't be ethical for us to answer yes or no when there's not a yes or no answer. And you know, you guys always do your best to answer everybody's questions to the best of your ability, but it's just not it's not going to be a yes or no answer most of the time.
I wanted to just add on to what Ashley and Jen have said about writing the playbook moving forward. You know, I'm curious maybe what Sandra thinks too, why this issue of misinformation never seemed to rear its head quite so strongly with other pandemics that or, you know, epidemics that we have witnessed in our careers. And it's clear that, you know, the World Health Organization has prioritized that we need to manage misinformation alongside any future epidemics, you know, or global pandemics. And so I think, you know, our group has such a role to play in what we've learned over the past year in how to do that and how that should be integrated into any future playbook. You know, we saw how our state and local health departments were just completely overwhelmed with just the management of, you know, testing and contact tracing and the nuts and bolts sort of on the ground work. And I think, you know, there was a need for other scientists to step up and say, okay, we're going to help translate, you know, these findings. We're going to help explain these new guidelines and partner with, you know, the people who are doing the other work, you know, at the same time. So I think that's, you know, something that I'm looking forward to figuring out how that becomes part of the playbook. And then I think the other thing I want to bring up is obviously we saw how social and racial inequities played out in this pandemic. And I think it's going to be vital that that becomes a stronger part of our pandemic playbook as well, recognizing that if none of us are protected and all of us are vulnerable to the extent that anyone is vulnerable and not protected and not, you know, having access to care, tests, treatment, you know. And so I hope that that becomes, you know, more integrated and more at the forefront of any future pandemic plan.
And also the structural factors that lead some more vulnerable groups, racial and ethnic, and also class groups, to be more exposed to the disease. I mean, there are structural factors that lead people to be bus drivers and work in hospitals on the support staff that have certainly exacerbated the pandemic. And I think a lot about the role of transmission in prison settings and how that has led to the racial disparities that we've seen.
I think
now some of those same factors, plus the partisanship that Lindsey was talking about, is also
Right.
shaping people's, you know, preferences around the vaccine and how fast we can get to, you know, 70% coverage has, you know, definitely elements of that as well.
Yeah, Allison, I was just thinking about how that like intersects the social and racial inequities and how certain people are at much higher risk intersects with the way we think about like individualism and individual choices. And I think often people just think about their own lives and their own nuclear families and like, what's our risk? And so like, what are the choices we should make based on that? And don't really think about how, like, as Ashley talked so eloquently about, like, we are all connected. And so some of these choices about your health are not really just about your health, they're about other people's health, and you might not even know those people, but they're in your community, and they're people you also need to think about. You know, I think we're just moving in this direction, or we have been, that we just really focus on just like us and our little bubble, but it just doesn't, it can't work that way.
I think that is a terrific point to end on, because it really is. I mean, that describes, if you want to know what public health is, that's what Shoshi just said. That's it. That's what public health is. And that lesson, or that challenge of getting people to think at the population level at the same time as making individual choices to keep themselves and their communities safe, is what needs to go in that playbook for the next time, right? That is the principal challenge that we've been facing and that Dear Pandemic has been trying to navigate for the last year. So we have to end there because we're over time. And I just want to thank everyone here and everyone on the team who is not on the call today, and our readers and viewers, for making this past year bearable. It truly, to me, does not bear thinking about what it would have been like without all of you. So thank you for being here. For our readers, your shares of our information have saved lives this year. I have been talking a lot about the power of the share button, and I think that's another thing that needs to go into that future playbook is, this is how information circulates. The share button on social media is it. So we really appreciate your commitment to facts and to your fellow woman and to your fellow man. So thanks for joining us. We will be back at the same time next week, Saturday at 9:30 a.m. Central Time. We will be taking reader questions next week, so go put them in the question box. Thanks again to Bridges for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing for providing ASL interpretation and CART services. And until then, stay safe, stay sane.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye all.
Bye.
Thank you.